Welcome to the Wellspring, where the grace of God is bubbling up for you and for all people wherever you are. The Wellspring Podcast is a digital ministry of Muhlenberg Lutheran Church, coming to you from the friendly city of Harrisonburg, Virginia, where we pray that this time together may truly be a wellspring of God's grace for all people who listen, equipping you with new ways to live out Christ's love.
Welcome to the Wellspring. It's a place for grace and faith and life and you.
Hello there. I'm Pastor Alex Zuber. I use he/him pronouns, and I serve as the Associate Pastor of Muhlenberg Lutheran Church, overseeing youth, campus, and young adult ministry. I'm joined today by guest host and Muhlenberg member Karen Barnes, a retired social worker, teacher, and all-around caregiver. It's so good for us to be together. This is episode number 5, titled The Way is Wide, discussing chapters 8 through 11 of Trauma Stewardship, an everyday guide to caring for self while caring for others, by Laura Van Dernoot Lipsky. Our guest host, Karen Barnes, offers reflections on her long career in various fields of caregiving and discusses 4 of the 5 directions that the book offers for finding your way to trauma stewardship. Creating space for inquiry, choosing our focus, building compassion and community, and finding balance are all directions in the wide way that each of us can follow. Through our discussion, we'll find ways of understanding the things that might burden us and hinder us from seeing these directions, and even reconcile the difference between a direction and a clear path. Paired with a study of Mark 6, 7 through 13, when Jesus commissions his disciples 2 by 2, we see that the way of compassion is wide, and we never walk alone. Well, welcome back. It is good to be back together for another episode of the Wellspring Podcast. I am delighted today to have the opportunity to walk through part 4 of this wonderful book on trauma stewardship. We are entering part 4, which is Finding Your Way to Trauma Stewardship, and I am excited to welcome our guest host for today, Karen Barnes, who Karen has had a wide and wonderful career. And brings many wonderful reflections on that career in helping professions to this conversation on finding your way. And so I'll let you introduce yourself, and you can help explain why I invited you here today.
Oh, that's good. Well, I'm tickled that Alex asked me. We had talked several times informally about the kind of work that I might do, that I have done, and then also he brought up this book, and he said this might be a good opportunity. But I have lived here in Harrisonburg for over 30 years, but I've worked as a social worker, counselor, teacher, mentor, caregiver specialist, primarily working with geriatric and their family, but have some years of working with children. But over the last 40-some years, so you can pretty much tell how old I am. And now I'm retired, but also this book has lent itself to my reflecting on all of these different pieces as we talk about trauma and stewardship. I'd like to say maybe caregiving. We are in the role of helper and caregivers. So that has helped me frame what we're going to be talking about today. So.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you bringing that perspective to this conversation, because I think for anyone who's I set this whole thing up under the premise of we're all experiencing trauma in the world around us today, and so if we just hope to bring a compassionate presence to our world, we need to understand trauma stewardship, because if we bring compassion to any one of our neighbors, we're going to experience trauma and be stewarding that others are carrying. And so that still feels true, but I think there's a lot of folks who have experience in who will find a connection point in some of the experiences that you have, either from their careers or from their volunteer opportunities, at any of one of these moments, or just within their families. And you've kind of seen this whole journey in different careers, and I know that in changing vocations, we often have to do a lot of discernment and find our way. And so this section 4 is about finding your way to trauma stewardship. And as we were discussing before we hit record here, there's two really meaty sections to this book. Our 2 episodes ago, we heard the 16 warning signs of trauma exposure response. Our last episode was about creating change from within, which I described as being kind of the spirit of this book, where the 16 warning signs was very meaty. That was very spiritual last week. And this is getting back into more meaty, but I think spirit enlivened by hopefully the internal work that we've discussed. Because now we're still in that wilderness that we described, but we've got this. I hope through this we're finding a sense of direction, because throughout part 4 of this book, she's lifting up 5 directions, and we're going to talk about 4 of them today. And she aligns them with our cardinal directions of north, east, south, and west. So we'll walk through those different directions and what it means to find those. On our final episode for the show next week will be about the 5th direction, and with the daily practice of centering for self. And so the 4 directions that we're going to talk about today relate to different elements. So she has them in here, but there's 4 basic statements. The direction of north is about creating space for inquiry. East is about choosing our focus. South is about building compassion and community. And west is about finding balance.
Deep breath.
Yeah, because and there's the rub with this is we hear, okay, I hear all of that, and it sounds like a lot more work. Mm-hmm. But I've found reading this section that has been pretty liberating and life-giving to think about these, that they don't necessarily feel like work, but they feel like purpose and hope.
Well, if anything, I like the idea that says directions, because it's a guide. Mm-hmm. And also the other, it's a lot of internal looking into yourself and then seeing what effect it has on other people. And of course, the first direction is this inquiry, and that gets into looking into why we do what we do, and as I talk about myself, in my roles through my life, some have been chosen, some have been given to me. As a daughter or a sister, there are certain things that I recognized early on that I am. I'm a helper. I took on those roles, maybe informally as well as formally, and then getting a degree in college, and then going into a helping profession. I even worked one of my first jobs in college was I worked as a CNA, and it worked for my classwork. And my mom was a director of nursing at a retirement community, and I knew what she did. She was a helper. She was the lady down the road that gave in our rural country area. She was the one that would go give somebody shots. And so I observed her, and she left me being responsible for helping my younger siblings. And so I got fed, so to speak, by being a helper. But in doing that creates some stressors, because you have expectations of being a helper and choosing that as a vocation. There's kind of a love-hate relationship sometimes with being a social worker, trying to deal with everybody else's problems. And that's part of this journey that we're talking about with these directions, is that internal understanding of who we are, as well as how do we find this sense of why do we do what we do, and how do we help ourselves and help others and find a balance. And these are the steps. So it's constantly ever-changing. It's ever-changing.
Yeah, well, and this first direction is asking why do we do what we do, not what do I want to do. And so it's a very different direction from one that creates change for self. I think there is, it can lead to change. Mm-hmm. And it's a very different kind of question from what do I want to do? Mm-hmm. This isn't the what do you want to be when you grow up kind of question. This is one that, particularly I think if you're established in a vocation, can feel really scary to ask, because you don't even want to begin pulling at that thread of asking, why am I doing this? Is this working for me? Is another one of the questions that she lifts up here. And I acknowledged in the very first episode the time that I took leave to step away for medical leave and to care for my own physical and mental health, and was encouraged to ask that very question of myself of, is this working for me? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I a pastor? And I really didn't want to start pulling on the threads of that, because what if I came to an answer that meant that I was going to be changing careers? That was terrifying. I just bought a house.
I know all of the very tangible vocational things, but in my reflection of looking at my journey over my 40-some work years, but then also that's happened, that inquiry of why am I doing what I'm doing?
Yeah.
And it ebbs and flows. Because there are times it's like, okay, and I have made changes. I mean, as I said, I was a CNA, and that was a kind of a building block. So when I got my social work degree, I went into being a social worker at a standalone nursing home, and this was 1980, so a lot of years ago, and did that for a while, and then stayed in that, and married, and moved around, and then I worked into another retirement community, a larger retirement community, as social service director. So I was dealing with staff, but it was helpful as you look at the things that were built upon. Now as I look at it on a developmental kind of life stage thing, where I started, I built upon those things, and then I moved to the Valley. My husband got a job at JMU, and then I took on the role out at VMRC. Some people might know VMRC, and that's a large, turned out to be 900 some people, and the kind of work I did there basically was dealing with all of the ins and outs and family traumas and residence traumas and staff traumas, where they were not enough resources to do what I need to do. And then I got into administration. And each time I had made these changes, I would ask myself, why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I crazy?
Yeah.
But then I also was fed, with and that's true with growing up with a mother as a nurse. There were a number of nurses in my family system, teachers, theologians, you see them doing those things. Why are they doing what they're doing? There was some intrinsic kind of positive feedbacks, but then also it's like, if you didn't make much money and you worked awful long hours and you had to deal with tough systems, and then you had people that didn't always live up to your expectations, and so and then how do you help those people that worked for you? So I built upon those things, and I understood all of those different components, whether it's the component of families and what they're going through, or the residents, and trying to bridge those things, or dealing with staff that I needed to advocate for too if I had supervised them, help train and supervise them, as well as once I got into administration, where's the money for this?
Yeah.
So, this whole inquiry of asking back, why am I doing what I'm doing?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you lift up that it was a question that fed you at times. And sometimes it led to a change. Sometimes it fed you, because when I asked that question for myself, ultimately, I discovered that I do still want to be a pastor. Here are the reasons why, and I was able to come back, I think, in a healthier sense. And it's not to say that someone asking that question might not learn a very faithful answer about why they want to change, but I think that there's a fearlessness that we need to ask a question like that. And Micah spoke last week of a fearless moral inventory when talking about that internal work. So that feels like a lesson that's carrying through of not being unafraid to ask yourself that question, and being okay with being led in a new direction, because the new direction might be a new understanding of why you do what you do, a new insight into what that looks like. And
going back to my journey too, in the discernment, each time I made a change, of course, I left this administrative role, and did a couple grant kind of things, but really pondered, do I want this as a vocation? Do I want to even stay in human services? I was so burnt out. But then I went back to some of my roots and worked for Valley Program for Aging as a caseworker. So I was back to working with clients, their families, their children, the systems, and found that that's kind of, that's the piece that fed me. I mean, sure, there were frustrations of, not enough money and you didn't get paid well. I mean, and yet, you had to, you saw that there weren't resources to help the people that you really want to. I didn't have the control over helping them. And yet, at that point in my life, I think I was 50 probably, that I realized it's really about relationships. Mm-hmm. And so I changed my focus and my inquiry about what is it that really feeds me. I say, it wasn't the avocation of, the vocation of the jumping career, moving up in careers, and I got into administration. But then coming back to the root of what maybe a social worker might do or a helper would do, and found that was a good place for me to be. And then I stepped out, decided to retire, and took care of my grandson.
So the caregiving role changed.
I had that. Yeah, I've been a caregiver. So now, and then every time and then in my role at church, I'm ready to jump into some other things too. So I'm at a crossroads now, jumping off place. Now that we got through COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another whole conversation, isn't it?
It has been. Well, and that was one that I think was severely disorienting for everyone. Mm-hmm. And so this aspect of finding our direction in the midst of this, that has been a time that has and continues to raise, I think, these kind of questions, sometimes unwillingly. Mm-hmm. Of why do I do what I do? And you mentioned a shift in focus, which I want to come back to that because it's a good bridge to the next direction where we talk about moving east in choosing our focus. But I love that you talked about the role models of helping that you saw, the ones that kind of helped guide you into the ways that you've helped. She also talks about a different form of purpose and a different source of why within this is to say that for some folks a reason for engaging in helping work can be trauma mastery, mm-hmm. where she lifts up this idea that trauma mastery is one way of coping with trauma. For many survivors of trauma, our lack of control over a traumatic incident is one of the most terrifying and unnerving things about it, and that lack of feeling in control can really be an incredibly disruptive thing to us. So as we discern a path, as we discern what to do, we can often find ourselves in helping roles as a means of reconciling that lack of control and recreating situations as similar to the traumatic incident as possible, where you felt powerless in one situation, you say, this is going to be a different outcome. And she lifts up that the trauma mastery emerges in our lives in three primary places: our activities, our relationships, and our choice of work. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Have you, with the people that you've worked with through the years or in yourself, have you seen trauma mastery as a motivation for someone?
Yeah, I have. Your friend spoke last time dealing with addiction. There are many folks that struggle with their own addiction, and they might have had those things in their families, and they end up going into addiction counseling, or that they've had to deal with that. Other folks that might be, and I've seen this systematically as I look at family systems, family groups, the type of work, folks that have experienced, I call it a big trauma, big T trauma, where you have, we tend to think of trauma as being PTSD, some military or something, and then you have other people going into helping other people that have gone through that. Yeah. Or we see somebody that has been in an abusive relationship that are helping now, going into counseling and helping that. I always laugh because I grew up with grandparents, both grandparents, and I got the message early on that helping older folks and taking care of older folks. I mean, my mother was very much she took care of everybody else more than she took care of herself, and I tend to have done that through my life, and so I also know that as I deal with child development. I have some child development in my background, so I worked with teen moms a few times when I was in graduate school, and knowing that parenting, I was a young parent at that time, so helping young teens fit at that time. That worked for me. There were a few years where I wasn't working with geriatrics. People that... Something else that I did in light of my experience with caregivers, there was a program at JMU that we worked with, Valley Program in JMU, that we helped. It was called Caregiving Community Network, and we helped work students who were not traditional nursing students. They were OT, PT, social work, psychology, that I taught a class on assessing through home visits and assessing needs and basing resources, and we would do home visits. And so partnering these young people with an older person, of which I would always say in the class that, more likely you'll be working with people 50 and older. I mean, that you'll be working with people that, at my age, this was 10 years ago, that, you need to understand where they are in their lives and what they are doing and how they are managing and some of the generational differences, but also all of the similarities. We're human, the relationships there. So you talk about building upon vocations, or my own experience. That seemed to be the focus and reframing of how you can make some changes through the years. My refocusing, and that was very enlightening, because I can do that. I did that as a part of my casework, but I use my clients, my older clients, with the students, and helped guide.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I love that. That's one of the things I love about intergenerational opportunities within the church. I mean, is a great thing, because in those types of settings, we get to learn from one another, get to find our similarities, and I think within that find the inspiration of others, and we can find more about our inspiration in the relationships we have with others, and I think it does lead to that shift in focus, like you're describing, because one of the things she lists up here in the discussion on the east direction of choosing our focus, being one of the means of finding our way in trauma stewardship. She talks about when we open ourselves to inspiration, we may also rediscover our passion. This is the perfect moment to be honest about what we are able to accomplish in our existing job and what our options might be. And I think as she goes through the rest of this, she would extend job to vocation, calling, family, your neighborly relationships, things like that. And so the searching questions that we talk about in the first direction, I think, open the door for this shift in perspective, this opening to inspiration and what inspires you to do your work. And we renew our passion and we place our focus in different places. So what has shifting focus looked like, where you're still you're still bringing your gifts to the table? When you shift your focus, does it come with needing to cultivate new gifts, or what is the role within that?
Interestingly, I've been fortunate in that, I can look back retrospectively, and see all the learning, and even as I share with students, as I did in the class, I would share my own experiences of what I saw at certain ages, or how things have changed, and really, while there's different changes in service delivery or resources, what I have found, our relationships with people on a developmental level, as a need-based level, hasn't changed. We all need the same things. And trying to help the students at that point, understand, kind of walk in somebody else's shoes. And that gets into some of the compassion that we talk about. But I've been able to be reflective of those things. And right now, as I'm 66 years old, I'm ready to, what purposeful things can I do in the area of serving and caring and helping. I am learning. I still want to learn. I don't necessarily have to be bound by 8 hours a day or the the long or the requirements. Of course, it's what can I do to help serve,
right.
And refocusing that. In my core, kind of like as you're a pastor or a nurse or a teacher or could be a police officer. I mean, somehow the vocations have been established, but there's also some core roots of that's our identity.
Yeah.
And who we are. And even as I retired and stepped out, I had to do some discernment in myself of like, who am I and what's my role and am I of value or what can I do to help? Or and those relationships change, our work relationships change. And how do you refocus that? And what new things do you want to do? I have more time to garden. I did buy a new house, and so now I have a whole yard I have to really mess with. So some of those focuses and looking at what can I learn and what can I do, not just to help myself, but see things a little bit, give myself permission to do that for myself as well. That's a focus. Self-care, kind of like, I haven't done that really well through my life. Now it's like, in the last few years, it's like I've asked myself that a lot. Yeah. And is it not selfish?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know you had that conversation too with Micah.
Yeah. And so that lesson I hope carries through all of this is to say that shifting focus in a time really, really hard within a helping profession often to shift focus in a season to self-care and say, I really want to do, but I need to stop and I need to shift my focus to caring for myself in this season. I'm looking at parental leave coming up.
I know, you are. Yeah, and I see that, and it's funny because I love the fact that when I see young people starting their families, it's like, you're going to get lots of words of wisdom. That's what people like me, old people do. It's just that we now recognize what we needed to do at that time, and you're talking about a focus. I have gone from. I've always been a doer, and been busy, and it's like, sometimes you're busy just because we don't want to deal with some other stuff, too. And I've seen that in families and people with trauma. It's like, I don't have time to do this and this and this and this, where being is what I say now I need to allow myself to be. Yeah. Not do, but to be. And that's okay. If I don't do things, I shouldn't feel guilty. But I've had this people-pleasing helper kind of mode for a long while that it can be a curse too. Yeah.
Well, and I think that there are circumstances and factors in life that will shift your focus, whether you want it to or not.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think this aspect of the East direction here and this intentionality behind it is about saying, I at least want to keep a hand on the wheel on where my focus ends up if it has to move, because I'm about to look away and shift focus to family very intensely for these weeks that I'll be off when our daughter's born, and so I'm so excited for that. And then the intentionality that I know needs to come with that will be, I am going to come back to work. Where do I then lay my focus? How do I focus and shift that focus and shift that direction and reframe my understanding of my work and calling and the things that I do in order to be attentive to these new circumstances I'm in? And that mindfulness of being aware that these things are there is going to be, I hope, far healthier than me saying, I'm just going to charge back in like nothing's changed, and I'm going to be getting pulled in a completely new, different direction.
Yeah. Well, the concept of reframing, because you can only look through your eyes of what you know now as a minister or as a helper, and now then you're going to take on a new role. That's why I said that the roles that we have in our lives, we have to think, how has that been part of us? I mean, as I brought up being a daughter, and so things that were beyond my control, things that were in my control. Now you have two things that were in your focus and control, but you have to reframe saying, how is this going to look? Yeah. How is this going to, and you almost have to wipe the slate clean to say, okay, it might be how you structure your day, how you how you prioritize things, because some things can't stay the same. You know that in your head, but in your heart, you still want to be able to. I need to be. This is what my role is as a pastor. Yeah. So here I'm being your cheerleader here, honey. So
and I think that's the aspect of not doing this alone. I think it's going to be one of the big things that we see in this is having the people that will support you in cultivating this sense of direction in different times, and those that can understand a reframing, and that when your energy and your focus shifts from one thing to another. In life, and you start reframing the things that you do, there might be some that don't understand that, and they might not understand. Well, your priority was here before. Why is your priority here now? And to say, well, we're in a different season, and that was my focus there. And if I wasn't able to hand it off to somebody to do, to lead that, and it needed to be let go, I think I faithfully discerned that. And so having people that are going to be around you that can help support you and keep you accountable to the ways that you shift focus is a really important thing. And that's going to be one of the things that she gets into in here is the way that we do this work together.
Well, and it makes me think too, and this was part of, I think, the balance between helping and losing yourself and all that, is that we have this mindset of what do people expect of me, and then what do I expect of myself, and those expectations, if they're not clear by everybody involved, whether it's in a church family or whether community or whether it's in a work community, verbalizing those expectations and understanding where everybody's from also helps us to reframe what's realistic, where we need to focus. And sometimes I had to, when I stepped out of an administrative job over at VMRC, it's like I knew I could not continue living up to the expectations of the job or myself, and where my priority and my focus needed to be, and my health. And so that was a big jump. And then I didn't stay, and then I thought, do I want to continue? Much like you said, if we don't have those times of discernment of in looking into ourselves and asking ourselves and reframing and all the pros and cons, so to speak, then if we don't do that, somehow we are floundering and not helping anybody, not helping ourselves or anybody else. But I did make that decision, and took some time to do that. Not everybody has that vocationally, because there's money involved. People stay in positions because of their insurance. They're I got to pay the bills. Yeah. So they don't have the control over it. So sometimes they have to stay in things, and that's mentioned in here. Stay in situations that are not necessarily what they see as being the best vocation, but they have to reframe what can I do, what can I have control over, what can I manage, and maybe looking through new eyes. That's one of the other sayings she says. To the reframe is, not looking at what's in front of you, but what rather is looking through new eyes, maybe seeing something else. Yeah,
I always love the act of taking off my glasses and wiping them clean and then putting them back on, because I realize,
how did I see anything in the first place? Yeah.
And these things got smudged. I say that and I hold them up to the light now, and I am ashamed of what these glasses look like. I will need to do the same thing there. And it is a fresh perspective. It is an opportunity to with these frames on my face, to reframe, to clean it off, look with this fresh perspective, new eyes, new lenses on life. And I think it's one of my favorite things to do, this act of reframing when reading scripture and getting into a parable. Let's reframe this. Let's look at it from a different perspective. I often enjoy that in preaching, of taking a traditional interpretive lens of a parable and turning it upside down and saying, I just want to see how it looks. Yep. Let's just hold it and look at it like this, because that might not be the way that we feel that it settles. We might not be okay with that interpretation, but let's be challenged by it a little bit. let's look at it in a different way, because we're going to come to a new sense of understanding. We're going to come to a new sense of purpose there.
But also, we talk about the relationships that can create some, some of the conflicts that we have, or create the tension, part of the trauma. Yeah. But allowing other people to help us reframe that too, to help see, by seeking out some counsel, seeking out, saying, I need some perspective. Yeah. I need some help in looking, and what I'm seeing, really what's going on. Is this something I can really manage? And so talking it through can help you even come up with, sometimes makes you feel better knowing that they're all feeling the same way. Maybe together we can do this better. Maybe I'm just ready to say, I'm ready to throw in the towel and quit this job.
Yeah.
But then sometimes when you find a way, especially as I supervise people, trying to get some perspective of coming up with a new plan. Maybe we need to have 10 people doing this and we don't have enough resources and money. But what is it that we can do that we can all do together other than doing it the same way?
Right.
And so, that gets into some systems and some changes there. But that in my job there administratively, that had to be my biggest challenge, because I wasn't dealing with a case or a family issue problem. I was dealing with program delivery, and then had people that needed to be the doers. And while I learned a lot about myself, it was very difficult when I could not do those things on a bigger scale. When I saw a bigger need and I couldn't meet those needs, and those folks that were really needy. I'll give an example of policy change. Medicare, Medicaid wouldn't pay for certain things. And we had to come up with a policy of saying we can only have so many people that are on any kind of public assistance. Where it was always open, we always said we accept this. We have to say, well, we have a limited amount. We were still helping people in need, but we can only do this many. So it was that question of a faith-based nonprofit saying, well, you're turning poor people away. You are just dealing with money now. You're just dealing with the rich people that can afford these things. Well, what did they say? There's not a mission without a margin, or margin without a mission. There's a saying about you got to look into that, and that's true with the church. That's true with all the lovely nonprofits that we have in town that I work with for resourcing services. And yet people say, well, I pay my taxes. They should do these things. I've paid this, and it's like, but there's less and less. So I get frustrated on a large macro systems perspective when there's not enough need, especially when somebody comes to the church and asks for that as well. Go apply over social services. Well, they've already done that. They have those things, and so we have that through a church community, and it's really still not enough. So I can get on my little soapbox here.
Well, it's a great soapbox to be on, because it does. It hands off beautifully to the south direction of building compassion and community. Because you talk about the people that are involved in this and the relationships that we hold. She lifts up in this section developing a microculture of supportive friends and families, wherein we create an environment that sustains us. She pairs this direction with the earth as an element. So our north direction was water, our east direction was fire.
Yeah, I saw that on there.
This is earth. But it's a grounding sense. Building compassionate community is a grounding thing. By being compassionate to ourselves and others, we ground ourselves. This is where we come out of isolation, tap into the core energies of Mother Nature, and tend to both our individual and collective health and wellness. And I like that she lifts up this element of starting with a microculture, because sometimes when you talk about the people and the expectations that we carry from others, and that can really be a barrier to how we reshift focus, to how we come to a sense of why we do what we do. Carrying the expectations of others can really get in the way of us fearlessly and faithfully asking those questions of us. And so when she's talking about cultivating a microculture, there's a delicate balance there with this. Balance is the west direction. We'll get to that. But I think even within this, there's a delicate balance of a microculture doesn't equal an echo chamber. But there is an inherent understanding within a microculture, like she's describing, of being people who will ask you good questions and faithfully be there for you and support you. And it doesn't have to be 100 people, but these are not the people that are laying extra burdens on you. And so coming to this step, coming to this direction, I think can be challenging for someone. It's sort of a backwards path as I read this of building compassion and community, is that you might need to downsize community for a season to focus on this microculture, to focus on those people that are there for you, who champion you, who love you, who are not adding extra burdens to your life, to then be able to re-engage with wider community and then be able to engage with communities beyond that. But there's this attending to the ones that are right around you. She says a microculture is simply a community, but I like the term because it reminds us that our chosen group may nurture us by emphasizing a different set of values than the culture at large. So that place where you resonate, those people with whom you resonate, it can be small. And so there's this, it feels like an interesting course of discernment and of direction to build community by maybe even shrinking community at first and finding that you're reaffirmed.
Well, we can use examples of let's say, of course, there's topics of advocacy in the community where there's people of like focus, that they want to create services and programs for, let's say, domestic violence. I'll use that as an example. And then you find that, or somebody who's gone through maybe their own trauma, and so they've found a natural group, a support kind of group, but then they have moved beyond or grown, and with their own discernment, that they feel supported by this group and that they can collectively make some changes. That, in my own simplistic kind of terms, I kind of see it that way. But we do that informally. Talking about where I'm at in my life, it's like I had work friends. Of course, I have families and my siblings, sister, and of course my daughters, and how we spend our time. And they're the supports, but also knowing that I needed more than just this group, that I am now seeking out through a focus of some interest, kind of whether it's gardening or books or church ministry, music. So I'm looking at how I can find these small groups. And we talked about this a little bit about the changes from COVID and the sheer problem of people being more and more isolated.
Yeah.
And yet we're feeling those things, but yet how do we create these small groups or these supportive groups? And these support groups can all be different people. I mean, people that may have different type of backgrounds, but then we find that's a safe place. So we're recognizing the need to do it, whether it's and the church is a safe place. It can be a vulnerable place, but it can be also a place to start. That tension between support and vulnerability and some risk taking is kind of what happens at church at times, and why people come and go. But we want to make it a safe place. We want, with our larger community. And how can we do that? Don't wish I had the answer. Totally.
No, it's not a. It's not.
I know. I always try to think, okay, what can I do to fix this? We always want to fix it, but it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do.
I was looking up here a resource for that I've heard of and have really appreciated, and I can't find exactly the person who did this. There's been a number of folks that have cultivated it in different ways, but they've talked about creating not necessarily a safe space, but a brave space.
Well, I like that. Yeah.
And it's to say, where it's going to be almost impossible for a community with a wide variety of perspectives and a lot of different people being part of it to create a safe space for everyone. We really want to make sure that it's a space where everyone can be safe, but there's I think within a larger, and I think within our microcultures, we can create safe space and truly safe space with those that we trust. But as we open up to bigger circles, and particularly I look at a wider church community, I think there comes a balance point when we need to look at it as a brave space, to say where we are all going to bravely step into this space. And we can't promise that no one's going to feel hurt here, but we're going to try to be vulnerable and honest and accountable with one another, to respond with grace to one another, and to name the hurts, and to be attentive to the needs of our community. But there is a really, really important need for the safe space. There is an important need for the micro communities where you can feel supported. And in this sort of trajectory that she lays out in this chapter on direction being south, building compassion and community, she says, she has a section of practicing compassion for myself and others, with a really wonderful quote that I love from Jack Kornfield, an American Buddhist monk and educator, who says, "If your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete." Yeah. And so this idea of community building that backs up to micro communities backs up even further to say, start with yourself. It's everything we talked about in that last section. Self-compassion first is the first step towards having an authentic compassion for those that are around you, whether it's a microculture or a macroculture. And
this makes me think of there's some discussion in this book too about the idea of being a victim. It's like, we can take on that role if we're in a, let's say, a work setting that it's, I say, toxic work setting, that we can complain about it and everything else, but if we don't look into ourselves and saying, what am I doing to contribute to this? Or it could be in a church community, what am I doing to that taking on the role of being the victim is not necessarily looking into yourself or self-care. It tends to be the blame game. It's somebody else's fault. If everybody else changes, I can't help but think of how everybody else needs to change. If everybody just follows the way I go, it's just fine. It's just like, but that's not how it works. That's not the idea of refocusing and reframing everybody else, but not ourselves. So that's another whole conversation. But the fact there was some discussion about this whole victim, that if we take on that role of victim in a trauma situation, that it's everybody else. And sometimes people leave church because of some hurt or some anger or a belief that things how they used to be change. These directions are all about change too.
Yeah, well,
not just about changing. I say a focus, changing, reframing how we look at things, giving ourselves some compassion as well as other people, and that for some that's a hard thing to do. Yeah. It's a hard thing, especially if they've been traumatized in their own vulnerability,
Yeah. So. Well, and I think there is. She gets into good conversation in here about the aspects of being victims, and there are certainly some situations that are large and systemic where you are. And you are a victim of where you are, and all the mindset shifting in the world might not change the very real pain that you're experiencing, and so there is kind of what you're getting into, and here with this, there's a distinction here between the victim blaming, pull yourself up by your bootstraps sort of approach, versus turning to self-compassion. In that of recognizing, what she lifts up in the early sections of this book about the reality of joy and pain, that it is okay to experience joy. It is okay to cultivate joy for yourself and for your communities as an act of resistance, and to be very honest about the pain that is around you.
Some people, it's hard for some people to move on to that victimization. It's like that if and I see this in trying to help people, being the helper, they may not want to take the resources or accept the resources, or they're angry about, and they've oftentimes gone through some kind of trauma where there's issues of trust and security. So how I can help through compassionate eyes, understand where they are. I think I said once, we were talking another time about, there's a book of what happened to you. And it was a book, I wish I can remember the author, but it's about understanding people's trauma in their life, so that makes you understand their behavior now, what's happened now. Could be either in jail, they've been abused, or alcohol, or it can be all the big trauma T's, but understanding what happened. And that's that compassion. I see that as compassion. Well,
and we talked about earlier before we were recording, one of the things to lift up in this section is to reiterate from an earlier section is an aspect of the misery Olympics where we can play with ourselves, be like, no, my trauma is not valid because it's so much smaller than this other trauma that's happening in the world. The pain that I'm feeling right now in my heart, the things that's leaving me sleepless, that's leaving me angry, that's leaving me completely dissociated and completely breaking down my normal life. Yeah, it's not as bad as somebody who's in Gaza right now.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, maybe not. Yeah. You're not in an active war zone, but it doesn't mean you're not hurting. And it doesn't mean that pain isn't going to produce more pain. And so that self-compassion really plays a role there, because I think part of what can help in being able to pull someone out of of a place of being a persistent victim, because continuing to be victimized, continuing to be oppressed and beaten down is so real and so valid. And I think that a big part of what can bring somebody up from that is empowerment. And when she's talking about these directions, it really is about empowering ourselves and our community, and cultivating this direction within, the sense of directions within community is about empowering one another to know yourself, to have volition in where you place your focus, to have a choice of those around who surround you. There is value in that, in being empowered, and so she's building the circle wider throughout this whole section of starting with self, microcultures, your wider communities, and she starts talking about what can I do for large scale systemic change. Because there's plenty of people that work in these, that they're doing important work within these major systems where you feel like it's you against the world as you look at some of these things that are totally stacked against you. And she said, if we have the energy, that's a big if we are inspired, and it's a big thing about these directions, and if we feel that we can interact with the larger systems while preserving our integrity and a healthy and hopeful sense of self, then we have the choice to support transformation on a larger scale. And that
was one of my favorite things. And looking at the staying inspired, and it comes in ebb and flow, that we have to constantly keep looking how we do that.
Right.
But as you were talking about the trauma, or the big T, little t trauma, it's just that as people talk about something they're going through, that's where we, as I say helpers, as caregivers, as the role of social workers, as church members, supporting each other, is just acknowledging that other person's pain, feelings, seeing that it's valid. It's understandable. Just saying, that's understandable.
Yeah.
It's understandable. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong. Doesn't mean you're good or bad. Doesn't mean it's not as important as somebody who's, dealing with a major death. It's still valid at this time. So we just recognizing those feelings, recognizing where that person is coming from, kind of, is the first step in how we can. And in essence, that helps us to better understand. Tell me more. There's a woman, a podcast that I listen to, and that's her mantra. It's like, tell me more. And I thought, well, that's, you need to hear those stories. You need to hear those things to understand.
Yeah.
You may not agree, but to understand. Yeah. So, well, the compassion, dealing with compassion is a big one.
It is. And I think that
for yourself as well as somebody else too.
Yeah. Well, and compassion seems to be this balance point. We keep coming back to compassion in all these different conversations. And I appreciate the framing, the conditional framing of that, of the way that we engage with the large scale social changes, is to say, no, there's a lot of other things that can be factored. And there might be days that you can handle this and days that you can't. Mm-hmm. And part of that compassion for your community that needs to be refocused back to yourself, that needs to be refocused back to your microculture before it can be back to the wider world around you. I think for me, one of the areas that I've found where I've struggled and I'm working hard on it is finding balance. And this is the West direction, the final direction that she lifts up here. She pairs this with the element of air in here, which I really do love that. She says, coming full circle into the West, we call upon the strength and introspection of the air element. By striving to achieve balance in our lives, moving energy through, and reminding ourselves of all that we are grateful for, we attend to needs as basic as the air we breathe. We celebrate the strength we receive by connecting to our inner self through our breath. The air is seen as universal power in traditional cultures. When we honor the changing winds, we see the impermanence of everything and understand the beauty of being awake for the here and now. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I lifted this up, I think, in our last episode with the very embodied sense of caring for self there. Of it felt very much like the beginning of Jesus' ministry in Mark. The kingdom of God is here. Behold. It is here and now. Repent and believe in the good news. Like it's right here, and this aspect of being awake for the here and now. These elements of our life and celebration and strength and gratitude, being as natural as the air we breathe. I think is.
It's interesting they use the example of air and balance. You know, but it is, we have to breathe out, breathe in. We have to have air. We can't, we need it to sustain us. We can't continue on without it. So yeah, mm-hmm. I do like the questions. It gets into the how-tos. The book has interesting in this section. It says, "Let's try this." It has these conversations. So if anybody has this book and they want to read through it, they are very enlightening questions. But finding a balance. Whenever I think of balance, you talk about work-home balance, and as you talk about a new baby and having to reframe and relook at your expectations and everything else, it comes down to it's like you only have so many hours in the day, but also you'll have a baby that won't fit necessarily in your control as far as their schedule. Yep. And then there's the dynamics within couples, and if you look at family systems, you look at and there's only so much balance you can really do. Some days you might find it go very well, and other days it's not going to. I struggled with that as a working mom, and a lot of it was my own expectations, how I wanted my home to be and how I wanted my work to be. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I couldn't do anything well. Nothing well. Let alone my marriage. No. Yeah. My husband tell you that. But it's like, so this balance probably is the hardest thing in that midline stage when you're dealing with your vocation, your home, and you're constantly having to refocus and reframe and inquire, is like, is this how I want things to be? Why? What do I do? How do I spend my time? So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it feels like a very natural force. The laws of motion, say for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. I remember that getting just seared into my brain as a kid in the early lessons in physics. But that is a force of nature. We recognize that, and so there is a lot of this that is balance. It's the breathing in, it's the breathing out, and so often we think that I've gone. There are times that are unbalanced times. Where we talk about our relationships, spouses are the ones that see you the most, that can probably say, "Yep, I can name the times that you were out of balance," and not yourself. And I think there's the permission giving for ourselves that comes with recognizing that time there are seasons of life that are unbalanced. As much as I love the high liturgical days of Holy Week, that's a very unbalanced time in my life, in my calling. And then even with the unexpected micro seasons of life where someone in the community dies, I know that my regular to-do list gets dropped so I can be there with the family. But the challenge, I think, comes from that of when I'm not doing the corrective rebalancing. Like, yes, this thing has pulled me over this direction. Fine. That happens. We can recognize that. Have I allowed myself to balance back? Have I? And I'll say, okay, I'll take an extra hour for myself that day. Did you only give an hour to the way that overextended you and the things that you were bearing in your heart and soul as you cared for this community who was hurting, for this person who was hurting, for this time of joy that was going to be taking a lot of energy out of you? I gave myself like an extra hour to sleep in. Wonder why I'm still feeling so out of balance. Yeah. And those kind of things.
That goes back to, again, how do I look at this? How do I mean, there's going to be times, but I think, and I'm at a season in my life too, that, I don't have the constraints of I say, a full-time vocation, a full-time job. And I have some things within my control, and I can say yes or no. Children, you can't say no. I don't want to do it with you today. So you just go put yourself to bed. You're not. It's just not the way it's going to be. As I watch my daughter and my grandsons, just as I remembered the harried, crazy times of that balance. So I think I can look at it again in a different perspective. But needless to say, every day you find a balance of what you can do with meaning and being and accepting and letting go. That's all part of balance. Yeah. I know your next presenter or host would be able to talk about balance very well there too, because I know bringing it all together is what you're going to talk about next time.
Yeah. Well, and that is, we're going to be getting into the fifth direction there, that act of being centered.
That sounds really hard, and I haven't read that. I haven't read that section yet. I read up to this point, but I thought, okay, that's again centering ourselves. Sounds like it's something way out there that's like, sounds good.
Yeah, great in theory, but I think that's the sense of where these directions come from, is the act of being centered and knowing who you are, this sense of intention. I think is what we get into in this last section, is that sense of intention, this sense of self, the sense of community, the sense of compassion. All of these factors are what guide us and what allow us to be led. And I think that is a part of the surrendering ourselves that goes with this, is where is the Spirit leading you? Because we are still in the reality that we talked about 2 episodes ago, 2 sections of this book ago, where the 16 warning signs of trauma exposure response are still very, very real. Yeah. And it's not like, I read that chapter of this book and therefore I got it.
I got it. Everything's all fixed.
Won't ever be touched again. I read that whole section on change from the inside out, and so I'm good. I'm changed. Yeah. No. This is a lifelong practice, because different traumas will emerge, different callings will emerge, different seasons will, and so this. I think the centering is a big aspect of knowing who you are, but this, as we were talking about before, like these directions, she was not offering all the answers in here. That really, it feels much more like helping you understand what directions you can go. But this 5th direction is, I think, going to bring us back to what is leading you. And for a person of faith, I talk about, where is the Spirit leading you? Where is the Paraclete, the Holy Spirit, the one who walks alongside you, leading you to go?
The concept of we're really not in control. I mean, it's like we're there, and there's biblical texts that talk about letting go, letting God, just giving it over to God, giving it away. There's how it's not my will, and yet we hold on to these directions. It's like, and finding balance. It's like, oh yeah, we'll plan out our day and do this, and we still try to control everything. We do,
Yeah.
but letting go is what the centering is about. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's some elements of this. When finding balance in here, she lifts up some elements like gratitude as being a really important thing, and it feels like a focus shifting thing, but it's if we say gratitude, it's not a complicated set of instructions, but to say if we walk with a spirit of gratitude, she talks in this aspect of moving energy through. I think I love that image of a deep breath. I had to do this with my confirmands on Sunday, where they had a whole week interrupted by a bunch of snow days, so they came into confirmation, pretty rowdy. And so we started by taking a deep breath.
Yeah.
And another deep breath. We did some breathing exercises. And then they immediately chimed in with how they felt about that, but it calmed them down a little bit, and it allowed them to kind of just move the air through to find this sense of balance. We got out of balance again a little bit quicker than I was hoping, but it was fine. But it did rebalance us in a way to take this deep breath and let the sort of chaotic energy that we were bringing move through us to be able to be together. And so she talks about allowing energy to flow. Again, she's leaning into a lot of Eastern wisdom here, but I think that there's a lot that we see in the way of Jesus as he is I see the way that he lets the negative energy of those around him flow right through him. To say, like, should we pay our taxes to Caesar? Well, whose face is on the coin? He's just moving the energy through.
So chill.
And he's working his way through the snares. Who is our neighbor? And so, like, there's all these different things where Jesus is letting the energy of the world around him move through while being very attuned to it and expressing gratitude. Thanking God constantly. And I think these are really important balance points of this whole conversation. And so with these 4 senses of direction, we'll get to this 5th sense in our final episode of this series, which I'm excited to do that next week. But I want to conclude and wrap this up with a reflection on Mark chapter 6. This is the mission of the 12 here, and Jesus lifts it up from Mark chapter 6. This is verses 7 through 13. It says, Jesus called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2, and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He ordered them to take nothing for their journey except staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and to not put on 2 tunics. He said to them, wherever you enter a house, stay there until you leave the place. If any place will not welcome you and they refuse to hear you, as you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them. So they went out and proclaimed that all should repent. They cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. I love this model. I love this model for mission. I love this model for community. You got little microcultures here. They've got their microculture of the 12. Then he sends them out into little microcultures of 2 by 2. There's biblical mandate for that in Deuteronomy that you needed 2 to bring charges against someone to prove the guilt here. But Jesus is also saying that in this kind of way, it's not about bringing guilt to places, but bringing truth and the hope of the kingdom.
But it's also relationships, too. It's like you can't, in dealing with on any of these things, it's like going out together, doing it together. Yeah.
And there's this unburdened sense of it. And I think that was a lot of what we were talking about here, the ways that relationships can become toxic and the ways that we need to cultivate our smaller communities along the way. Some of these different elements that can emerge is a way of say, I'm going to not carry this burden with me. I'm Jesus is saying, no bread, no bag, no money in your belts, no expectations, no negative Nancy's, no self-doubt, no self-deprecation.
Yeah.
Don't carry those things with you. That's a burden. Why are you taking those on the road? And I love the response of, if they won't welcome you, they refuse to hear you, leave.
Yeah.
Shake the dust off your feet. And there's another one of the Gospels where Jesus is questioned, and the disciples are pretty full of themselves, and they say, do you want us to call down fire from heaven against them? Just, what? No. Stop. No, absolutely not. That's not what we do. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to go out 2 by 2. They won't receive you. You shake the dust off your feet. So when paired with, you want us to call down fire from heaven versus shake the dust off of your shoes, two very, very different responses. And
it's kind of just let it go.
Yeah.
Let it go.
And again, this setting down of the burden lives with you.
Let it go.
And so he doesn't outline a roadmap here. He outlines a way. And there's a trust to this and a way that they're going to be led that I think is really beautiful and really powerful. And so I'm grateful to have this example set before us here of what it means to be commissioned. What does it mean to be in mission together as God's people? What a gift it is, what grace it is to say that the way is not about having more stuff, having the right answers, but about walking unencumbered. You have everything you need to walk in this way. Now be led in the directions that the Spirit is leading you. In these 4, 5, as we get into it next week, directions.
And we're not alone. We're not alone. Yeah.
We're not alone. And so one of the encouragements I want to offer, we like to usually end with some questions as we go, but I love some of these different opportunities that are raised in the try this section. I'll read one from each of the 4 directions here. From the north direction of creating space for inquiry, she asks, she says to try this, if you think that trauma mastery is one reason you're drawn to your work, assess how else you are attending to this original trauma in other areas of your life. Are there additional ways to support your healing, thereby decreasing your potential dependence on your work in this regard? Fearless sort of question that we can bear to our work of being mindful in the ways that we serve. For chapter 9, the east direction of choosing our focus, she says, for one day, commit to paying attention to the running commentary in your mind. Is your mind in the habit of seeing the glass as half empty or half full? Are you able to reframe things as half full, or do you feel an investment in seeing things as half empty? I really liked that. Of all of the reflections, I like that one a lot.
The cartoons, the little things in there, something about the house burning down, and with the moon and a picture of a moon. It's like, at least I now can see the moon. So it's like my house burnt down, but I could see the moon.
See the moon. I love that one. So that's a good reframing. For the south direction of building compassion and community, she offers, identify the members of your microculture. To what degree do they nurture hopefulness, accountability, and integrity? Think about whether you could use stronger role models in any of these areas. And then finally, in the west direction of finding balance, I love this encouragement to lean into the gratitude that's around you. She says, every single day, think of one person you are grateful to and tell that person so. Tell that person so. That's the important part. You can start with those close to you and slowly branch out to expressing your gratitude for all the teachers in your life.
I'm grateful for you asking me to do this, and I'm grateful for you just because it's always a good opportunity just to have a nice conversation. So I appreciate your gift. Yes.
I appreciate you being here and giving your time. I really do. This is a wonderful conversation, a wonderful opportunity, and so thank you.
Well, and I'm looking forward to just, and I would encourage anybody else that's listening and other people, church members, that this is a fun way of doing some Bible study, or if we want to call it Bible study, or just study, learning, self-development, growth. I think this is a great way of doing it. So hopefully this will take off. And it's always great to have big groups, have book clubs. I know your mom wants a book club.
Yep, I know.
I'm mentioning her, so she's listening. Hello, Mom. We just talked about that too. So, but this is a good opportunity.
Yeah, and so that is one of the encouragements that I always like to offer, is to say I don't necessarily just want to throw those questions or to try out into nothing. Find your microculture with this and engage. This is it's book, it's Bible study, it's a little bit of both. We'll see. The future of this might lean in different directions as we try different things with the Wellspring podcast. But I want to encourage everyone to discuss these questions, these topics, these chapters with a conversation partner. And whatever you're comfortable sharing, you're also invited to share your reflections in the comment section for our Muhlenberg Lutheran Facebook page, or on Instagram at Muhlenberg LC, or on YouTube. Wherever you engage with your podcast, you're welcome to share. So thank you for gathering with us today around the Wellspring. We are looking forward to another episode, the last one in this series, which takes place next week. You can learn more about our Muhlenberg congregation online, or by joining us for worship each Sunday at 8:30 and 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, with the 11 o'clock service streamed live on Facebook and YouTube. Your financial support of the ministry of Muhlenberg makes the many ministries, including digital ones like this, possible for our community. You can make your gifts online at muhlenberglutheran.org/give. I am Pastor Alex Zuber.
I'm Karen Barnes.
And I am so glad we could be together today. I pray that God's grace has bubbled up to meet you wherever you are. Now, go in peace to live out Christ's love.